Hi there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Priya and I'm a realtor in the Dufferin County, and in today's video I'm going to talk about OREA Form 300 Buyer Representation Agreement, which is often referred to as BRA. A BRA helps to set expectations for both you and your realtor. This agreement outlines the scope of your realtor services as well as any fees or commission that you would be responsible for. This can help to prevent misunderstandings or miscommunications down the line. As a realtor, it is my duty to explain to my clients all the paperwork that I am presenting to them for their signatures, but it is equally important for you as a buyer to know and completely understand what you are signing. Also keep in mind that this is the same form that we would use with a tenant. Now before I get into the form, as always, if you learned something new from today's video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Alright, so what is this buyer representation agreement? This form is a contract between a buyer and the brokerage that formalizes their working relationship and gives the brokerage permission to act on the buyer's behalf in the purchase of a property. Assuming the buyer is a client of the brokerage, the Real Estate Council of Ontario requires the realtor to have a written buyer representation agreement presented for signatures prior to being an offer being presented on behalf of the buyer. It's also worth mentioning here that a BRA is not a one-size-fits-all agreement. It can be tailored to meet your specific needs and preferences. Like you can specify the length of the agreement, the geographical area, and any other terms that are important to you. Now let's get into the agreement. The top section identifies the parties involved in the agreement. One thing you should pay attention to is that you are signing this agreement with the brokerage and not your realtor. So the relationship is being formed with the brokerage. The agreement requires you to mark the commencement and the end date for this agreement, which means that you are committed to work exclusively with your realtor until this agreement expires. Now this time frame could be anything, a week, a month, or could be a few months. But if the time frame exceeds 6 months, you are required to initial beside these curly brackets. Next, we need to state the property type. For example, if you are looking for a single family residential or an office or an industrial building, it needs to be clearly specified in the agreement. Next, we need to define the area where you're looking to purchase. For example, we could write Town of Orangeville, Town of Shelburne, City of Brampton, or anywhere that you're interested in buying a property. Further, the buyer is warranting that the buyer has not entered into any buyer representation agreement with another brokerage. You can do so by initialing in this space. The rest of the form is pretty much a few standard clauses. Let's go through clause number 1, definitions and interpretations. This section of the form defines the terms that follow in the document, including seller, buyer, purchase, etc. For example, buyer is referred to as purchaser, tenant, and lessee. A seller includes a vendor, landlord, and lessor, or a prospective seller, vendor, landlord, and lessor. The next section. This next section of the agreement sets the structure for the commission to be paid to the brokerage. It states that the buyer agrees to pay a commission to the brokerage, the details of which is set out in this section, in exchange of the services provided by their realtor. The brokerage is entitled to the commission when the buyer enters into an agreement to buy or lease a property. In Ontario, most commonly, the commission for the buyer's agent comes from the listing brokerage, or in some cases, it can come directly from the seller. If it turns out that there is not enough that the seller is offering, the buyer will make up for the difference. Now let's say that the buyer ends up buying a property directly from the seller after the agreement expires, but before the specified number of days. The brokerage is still entitled to get paid. This part of the agreement specifies agreed number of days. This is also called a holdover period. The clause number 3, representation, refers to the working with the realtor document and confirms that the brokerage and the salesperson have explained different type of agency and other relationships that may occur in a real estate transaction. It also explains multiple representation and what happens when a brokerage is representing both buyer and the seller in a transaction. Referral of properties. This clause states that the buyer understands that they need to communicate to their realtor any property that they are interested in. The buyer will be responsible to pay commission to the brokerage if the buyer purchases a property during the term of the buyer representation agreement or the holdover period. Indemnification. This clause states that the realtor and the brokerage are trained in dealing in real estate but are not qualified to determine the physical condition of the property, and the buyer agrees that the brokerage will not be liable for any defects. Finder's fee. This clause is written as a consent in the event the brokerage or salesperson receives a finder's fee or any other reward as a part of the transaction. For example, the realtor may be receiving a fee from a mortgage company or any other trade. Though when it actually happens, a specific consent will be required. Consumer reports. The buyer acknowledges that the credit checks and personal information may be referred to in the process of purchasing a property. This section gives the realtor the right to use personal information provided to them by the buyer in order to assist in making the transaction happen. It also assures the buyer that this information will not be distributed to third parties. Conflict or discrepancy. Now, this clause means that if there's ever a discrepancy or a conflict arising because of something added to the agreement, usually in a schedule, then the provisions that were added override the standard provisions in the form. Successors and assigns. In the event one of the parties dies before closing, their heirs and executors are bound by the agreement. Electronic communication. This is a consent that the agreement, if necessary, may be sent via electronic means and still be binding on all parties. Electronic signatures. This clause provides consent if the parties use electronic signatures with respect to the agreement. If additional terms or specific form or document is added to the form, then it is referred to here as a Schedule B, C, D, or any letter that they want to. This particular section states that the brokerage that is representing the buyer will assist the buyer in finding a property with a general description as indicated in this agreement and endeavor to obtain the acceptance of an offer for the buyer. The realtor signs this on behalf of the brokerage. The buyer acknowledges having read and understood the terms of the buyer representation agreement. The declaration of insurance is signed by the realtor stating that they carry insurance as required by the Real Estate Business and Brokers Act. Well, that's it for today's video. If you learned something new, please hit the like button for the YouTube algorithm and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next video explaining yet another form. I'll see you all in the next video.